and welcome everyone to the Capital Mind podcast. If you'd like to know more about us, visit capitalmind.in, and if you'd like to invest with us, do visit capitalmindwealth.com.
This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon as the basis for investment decisions. Clients of Capital Mind may maintain positions in the securities discussed in this podcast.
Hi and welcome to Capital Minds Podcast edition 36. We have a very interesting episode for you this time, and this time it's a little bit different. It's not going to be about RBI, bonds and wealth and all that stuff, but it's the more important part of life. It's wealth with the W replaced with an H. So health, and I have with me a very, very, very interesting guest, Vivek Subramanyam. He is the CEO and founder of LiveAltLife, which is a holistic solution that helps you reverse diabetes and other lifestyle diseases such as excess weight, PCOS, and so on. And Vivek and I go back a really long way because, we met as freshers in a little college off the coast of Karnataka called KREC Surathkal. And our paths have crossed multiple times in the last few years. I've even worked with him as a consultant in the episode I was before Capital Mind. So life has taken us in many different directions, and Vivek's here to tell his story. Welcome to the show, Vivek.
Super, Deepak. Thanks for having me. Lovely meeting you in a professional setup, which I think has happened a few times, like you're saying, but it's more as buddies from 30 years back that we catch up as opposed to professionally having a conversation. But great to be on the Capital Mind podcast.
Yes. And I think the first time we met, we were a lot healthier than we are now. And it's time to bring back that healthiness into everybody's life. So what I find very fascinating with all my conversations about health with you is that, it always goes back to first principles. And the phenomenal thing that I hear from you is that you're not just saying that when you're going to reverse diabetes, it's not like with medicine or with just, eat this and everything will be fine. There is a science behind this whole thing that's not just fascinating, but it's also like, if that is so, then why are we eating this instead of that? And it starts to ask the very basic questions of what, one knows about health and wealth and stuff like that. But I think I also like to see parallels of this way we look at our financial lives, which is the wealth part of things, and how you seem to be addressing things around the health part of life. So, cut to the chase, the first principles part, and we go back to that all the time. We say, okay, why are bond yields going up? Is because, the government's borrowing too much and there's more supply, less demand. There's first principles. So therefore, prices fall. You actually, as things go around, I think my knowledge about the health part of things is, okay, if you eat too much, you'll become fat. And that's pretty much where it ended. But I think the concept that started LiveAltLife by was to actually use mechanisms that were not ordinarily known, perhaps, to help reverse diabetes almost naturally. And you have yourself been able to reverse it to an extent where you're off medication. So tell us a little bit more about how that's come about.
I think you've just opened the Pandora's box of knowledge on health. But I think, Deepak, as I'm thinking about this, I think the two most important things on people's mind these days, one probably is the wealth part. Second's probably the health part. And between the two, first, we've got them covered, right? So that's a good thing about this podcast. But essentially, Deepak, you know the story, you know the backstory. I'll just kind of, in a compressed way, talk about it so that people who are listening to this get a context to this. Obviously, this whole journey started as my previous entrepreneurial venture was ending. We sold to a Nasdaq listed company, and I was wondering what the heck to do next. But one of the things that had come as a legacy of life thus far was diabetes, which I got diagnosed around 13, 14 years back. I was still in the US, I think early 30s. And I'd followed a typical path, medicines, and hope that you make the right choices. Every couple year, your dose keeps changing, etc. And suddenly, after the exit, I had all the time in the world. So two things I was mulling over. One, what problem do I solve next? And two, how do I change the state of my health? And how do I get better? And obviously, both of them converged, and that is what Live Alt Life is all about. But it was with a lot of deep research, right? Maybe 30,000 pages of research, maybe 100 conversations with doctors and researchers to understand the latest science, etc. But for this audience, I'd like to kind of keep it simple. And for anybody that wants more details and find it fascinating or interesting, which I do now, obviously they can go to our website, and there's a lot of blogs out there that talk about first principles, cellular health, mitochondria, nucleus, and all of these. Because these, I think, other than in the last couple of years, was probably in high school when you last kind of talked about this or had a perspective on this. So that being said, I think essentially, Deepak, while the world and us look at, let's say, diabetes and hypertension and cardiovascular disease and, let's say, Alzheimer's and dementia, etc., as different diseases, different symptoms, different treatments. And to a large extent, that's true. However, with any medication, this doesn't get better. And that was a question that what is the holy grail? Why is this the case, right? And does this need to be the case? I didn't have an answer. But as I went through tomes on physiology and microbiology, biochemistry, and kind of put all of this together, one thing I realized is at the heart of it, and you peel this onion, you see a different picture. You peel it further, you see a different picture. One level of peeling, you see there's many things that are kind of common to each of these diseases as we know them, right? You peel it some more, you realize that the supervillain is one. And the manifestation of that supervillain is all of these various things which we call a disease, right? So, what is that supervillain? The supervillain is, metabolic imbalances, typically hormones that are not functioning. It is cells that are not healthy and performing well. I'll just repeat that. Essentially, it is cellular health and function which is not good. It is obviously the body has multiple defense mechanisms, just like our country has army and navy and air force and BSF and CRPF, etc. We broadly know about it as immunity, but there are multiple components within immunity. Are things like a macrophage and a natural killer cell and a B cell and a T cell, etc. But outside of those, there are stem cells, your DNA sanctity, what's called your gut microbiome, your angiogenesis, etc. All of these play a role in ensuring that the human body is kept safe against intruders and invaders, right? And that becomes weak. So essentially, imbalanced metabolism, and one key hormone is something called insulin, and insulin resistance is one common thing we see across many of these. It is impaired cellular health, where your cell is not functioning as well as it should, leading to a process called inflammation. It is essentially your immunity that is inferior and is not well trained and well adapted to fight the invaders and intruders. Now, that is the same across all of them. And this is the root cause that manifests over time as one or more of these diseases. And the medical world kind of recognizes it and calls it metabolic syndrome. And obviously, the first question I figured out the answer is, when I take medicines, why am I not getting cured? Why am I just managing it? And the answer is because we are trying to address the symptom. When you have a solution, it is just helping you get a sense of control, but in reality, you're not getting better, right? So you're managing it. Whereas if you actually were to solve for it, you need to solve for it at a root cause level. And then the whole time spent was, what are those components of the solution? And luckily, it turned out to be, I've given it a nice engineering college kind of a acronym. I call it FRESH, which is fasting and food as medicine, right? Which plays a super critical role. I would say around 60% of the impact of how our body works depends on nutrition, right? R is what I call rhythm alignment, which is, our body has a clock. We call it the circadian rhythm. So different parts of our body don't function the same way at different points in time in a 24-hour cycle. How do we align any activity we do to the time when those organs are at their peak performance, right? So that's the question. That's rhythm alignment, right? Exercise, important, everybody recognizes it. But I would say, let's take two views on exercise. One view is build muscle, become a Salman Khan, Hrithik Roshan, any of these. Other is ensure that your metabolism is humming. And these are two separate goals. What we focus more on is, how do we ensure your metabolism is running well? And what you need to do for those is completely different from what you want to do if you want to be on the cover page of some magazine, etc. So that's exercise. And then S is sleep. And all our life, starting from our hostel days, I think we've been beating sleep, trying to get more and more done, which is great. And I felt, and we felt, that sleep is more about rest and rejuvenation, but we seem to have the energy, the focus. By sleeping less, we get more done, etc. But as I did this research, Deepak, very interestingly, I figured out while rest and rejuvenation is one part of it, other critical part that we are not aware of is that there is a maintenance of the body's cells that happen, and that typically happens when you sleep. And when we don't sleep enough, what ends up happening is equivalent of biological garbage that gets collected in the body. It could be weak cells, it could be dead cells. When we use our brain, there are metabolites called beta amyloid and tau protein, etc. And these need to get cleansed before we start our new day. But when we don't sleep enough, this garbage kind of gets collected. Just like in the city, if the civic authorities don't come and clean it up, your garbage piles mount up. Same thing's happening within the body. And there's a technical term of for one of these called autophagy, etc. And these don't work well. What ends up happening is your weak cells, and obviously it is more susceptible to disease. It can get mutated, it can take you down a path to cancer. You have or you age faster, etc. And obviously, if you I talked about, in the brain there are metabolites like tau protein, beta amyloid, etc. Now if those don't get broken down and cleansed, they actually block arteries in the brain, and then stop nutrition from going to neurons, and that takes you down a path of cognitive decline, and eventually you get to an Alzheimer's and a dementia, etc. Right? So sleep can't underscore the importance of the role it plays in a healthy body, and that was an eye opener for me, right? And the last was what I call harmonious mind, which is stress free, which essentially, to a large extent, I thought stress and what we find, when we're worried, etc., anxious, it's all in our mind, it's psychological, but it doesn't have anything to do with physical health. But clearly, now I know that there's a cascade of hormonal action that happens. So it's not just psychological, there's a physiological impact. And that leads to some of the hormonal resistance, that leads to you putting on weight, you becoming diabetic, etc., etc. So stress is not something to not stress about, right? It is super important. It is something we need to pay attention. It's not just in the mind, it impacts our body. So just to summarize, food and fasting as medicine, rhythm alignment, exercise to ensure your metabolism works well, sleep, and your harmonious mind, which is stress free. This is what I call fresh. And that is the solution that solves for it at a root cause, where your metabolism becomes better, your cellular health becomes better, and your body's defense mechanism and immunity kind of strengthen. And once I realized that, I said, hey, this is science that people don't know. And will it work? We did a pilot where we applied it. Then we had people that had multiple conditions that went through the pilot, and we saw extraordinary outcomes. People who are diabetic, by the end of it, were off medicine and showing green parameters, etc. And then obviously, this, we built out the systems and the processes, supply chain, and all of the capability to deliver this as a solution, took it to market, and we did a beta over the second half of 2020. And we had around 50-60 people do it. Again, phenomenal outcomes. People who are on cholesterol medication and diabetes medication and BP medication, etc., around 100 kgs. By the end of it, they're at 75, 80 kgs, all parameters green of all their medication. So we realize that while this knowledge exists, the solutions that we get from our traditional advisors are based on science of maybe 2-3 decades back. That helps you manage, which is something you should do at a minimum if you have any one of these. But it does not help you make a U-turn, right? And the simplistic way to frame it is, think about it as you're told you're on a one way heading towards a bad destination. The only access you have is to a break. You can just slow down your journey, but eventually you're going to get to the inevitable destination, right? Whereas the holy grail is there a U-turn? I don't want to go to a state of bad health. And, if there's no other way, yes, I will press the brakes as hard as I can to delay that journey. I mean, the speed with which I'm getting to the destination. But the solution is actually a U-turn in a one way. And when we take a root cause approach, Deepak, that's what we've seen. We've seen phenomenal outcomes where people get off insulin and multiple medications, and their body parameters are all well, and all by applying safe and natural solutions. And I'll talk a little more about it later. But I think it's too much science for people that are more interested in alpha and beta, etc. And the only beta I had was the beta amyloid. But I think essentially, there if you solve for the way your body functions at the core of you, the disease goes away, the manifestation of the disease goes away, and the levers available are completely safe and natural. And I think that's what we've cracked and something we're taking to market as a solution.
This is awesome. I think of so many things over here, and I think each of them requires like probably a podcast on itself. But uh, you know, I look at it sometimes as parallels in the financial world. So maybe that's just me because I'm a finance geek and geeking out on all of these things. But you see, some of the things that you mentioned, for instance, you have to have a process that has to be followed. So don't look just at the outcome. So you may have the same outcome with the medicine, saying I'm feeling better, but the feeling better using a process that is more likely to sustain by itself is probably better. Plus, it's addressing the root cause, like you said. But in the financial world, we also get these, right? We write a lot. You hear this. I have to save money for retirement. And then somebody comes to me when they're 40 years old and said, is it too late? Because I've never saved anything. I spent whatever I had. I put some money into a house which I live in. So obviously, I don't have any money right now. So can I start now? Is it too late? And my typical answer to them is, well, it's never too late. You have to save for your retirement. There's no choice for it. If I say that there's no chance, what are you going to do? Spend all your money till you suddenly turn 60 and then stop living after that? But you can't do so. Is there an equivalent, perhaps? Because we're both in our mid late 40s now, unfortunately, because we've passed that little barrier. But we've come to a point where we've at least I've started to see, and I was a member of I saw personal health benefits of it, and I realized that time that it's not perhaps a point where I can say, listen, I'm going to die anyway, and this thing can change my life. But what is your answer to someone who comes to you and says, is it too late? I don't even know what I have or where I am, and how can I fix this? And is there such a thing as too late?
No, Deepak, I don't think our answer is going to be any different. I think, it's never too late to become healthier. It's never too late to fix your body and the way it functions. I think it's more a state of mind. As long as you believe that you will benefit from a healthy body, the right time is now. I mean, it always was yesterday, but you didn't know what you know now then. So when you realize, I think it's time to act, and it doesn't really matter, right? Because what we've seen, and extending my previous point, some all of these lifestyle disorders, it's not a switch. It's not like you were okay today and tomorrow you have diabetes. It actually, like a snowball, cascades over a period of time where it slowly deteriorates, and then at some point in time it breaches a threshold, which is when you get diagnosed saying, hey, you know what, you're pre-diabetic, or you have hypertension, or you have probably plaque formation in your arteries and stuff like those. But it's at least 10, 12, 15 years before that that things have started going all right. So we've come across people when they just get diagnosed the first time, saying that, hey, I'm scared, I don't want to go down this path, and can you fix me? Yes. There are people who say that, what, looks like all is well with me and I want that to continue, and is there some way you could help? The answer is yes. And then there are others who say that, it's pretty much give up time. I've been, let's say, diabetic or hypertensive for 20, 25 years. My medical reports are shitty, right? My doctors say, hey, I'm a living miracle, and etc. Can I still do this? And the answer is an emphatic yes for them as well, right? And I would say the right time is when you are able to make up your mind saying a healthier body is better than the one I'm currently in, right? If you believe that you want to make that change in direction, the right time is now. And I think irrespective of where you might be in that continuum of good health to bad health, there is help. Like they say in Hogwarts, there is help available for those that ask for it, right? So the solutions exist, and now is the right time, right? Essentially. And the moment you realize you need to work towards fixing it, we're happy to help any person, irrespective of where they fall under this continuum. And in fact, I would also say we have built a tool, and I don't know what the equivalent would be, but I'm sure there would be one in the financial world, where we believe, based on the first principles and the way the cells are working and the metabolism is functioning, we're actually able to predict if you will go down a path of any of these in X years, etc. Which is not something that exists, but this is based on existing science. But we built an algorithm. We call it a protection score. How protected are you today against the chance of you getting disease tomorrow? So even if you believe you're healthy, I would still believe that, looking inside, are the cells working well? Is the energy production clean? Right? Is my defense mechanism good? Etc. will tell you a lot and help you proactively plan against something, a road, a path you might have started embarking on without knowing.
Interesting, interesting. Because you do have financial tools, of course, that tell you, okay, if you don't save more money, you're not going to be able to retire and live a long enough to be able to live a happy life. There are people who have heuristics. There are people who use benchmarks. So people who try to use things like inflation estimates and so on. I guess an equivalent of that would exist in the health part of life. But I think what's interesting to me is like if you don't understand this stuff. Or if you don't take cognizance of it, then all the wealth you have will probably be spent in countering the negative effects of whatever health issues you have. And perhaps one part earlier than that. But you see, in the financial world, uh, we get signs sometimes, and these signs we call red flags, and those red flags are very simple to kind of see. Sometimes they're complex. So we saw yes bank gets warned 3 times by an RBI saying, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. And Satyam, which of course came out of the blue, there was no red flags, but some people were talking about Satyam for a while before that, saying there's something wrong, there's something not. So we've seen this in a number of stocks where the red flags appear, and sometimes you seemingly ignore them, saying, okay, why will this guy do such a bad thing? But they're red flags. We've come to a point where as we grow, we identify those red flags and say, now we've got to be a little careful, and so on. What's that, where you come from? Because I think what you're telling people is also that, listen, your red flag isn't that you're in a hospital bed and dying. Your red flag comes maybe 13, 14 years before that. What are those equivalent red flags, and how do you guys create that process to identify them?
Absolutely. And I think, Deepak, same parallels. I would say, even in the financial markets for companies, by the time the, let's say, end consumers get to know, the malaise has been slowly but surely spreading over years, right? It could be small pieces of misdemeanors, I don't know, right? But there are those red flags. Same thing about the human body, right? And the difference though is, there it takes an expert like, Capital Mind, you and people like you, to be able to identify, discern, and kind of disseminate that knowledge on what those red flags are, and hence what action needs to be taken. Whereas I think in the world of medicine and health, etc., we're not at there, right? So right now everybody is fighting. It's in more like what I would call a firefighting mode. Nobody is thinking about prevention as much, right? So if you have a problem, we know what drug to give, what procedure to do, etc., and kind of fix what's wrong. But I think when it comes to lifestyle conditions, like I said, cardiovascular risk or hypertension, etc., there are telltale signs available, right? And this is what I call, there are secrets in your blood. You just need to decipher them, right? And once you know that, you get a red flag, or literal red flag coming from your blood, and it gives you signs on what you need to do, right? Except this knowledge is not as easy or as well known, because I think we're still behind the curve in the space of health, medicine, wellness, etc. But a few things, right? And like you talk about inflation, I think in the world of the human body, it's a term called inflammation, right? And the simplistic way to visualize this is, obviously our arteries play a super critical role. They are the supply chain that provides every cell with nutrients and oxygen for energy production and for us to kind of stay alive. And imagine that's the plumbing of a house, right? Which brings in internet, which brings in electricity, which brings water, and obviously we need all of these to live well. But if all of that started getting rusted and is not functioning as well as it possibly should, you're still getting your nutrition, you're still getting your water in the tap, you feel all is well. But slowly there is something building up inside, there's rusting that's happening, and one fine day you don't get water, right? And that needs a, you need a fairly disruptive way to solve for it, which is break the wall, figure out where there's a problem, etc. And same thing with the body. But what if you were to know that, hey, you know what, there is a problem with the piping, the plumbing, etc., and it's much easier if you add this additive now to kind of fix it, right? You don't need to wait till you need to bring the whole house down and kind of rebuild it to get some of these to be working. And one such process is something called inflammation, and maybe I'll show off a little, right? In the cell, there is a process called oxidative phosphorylation or Krebs cycle, etc., which is what where there are these chemicals that go through in the mitochondria. On one side, there is a proton that gets stripped off, and then there are a negatively charged particle. It's called a electron transport chain. And at the end of it, there's something equivalent to a turbine, right? The way to visualize it, called an ATPase. And that's when the protons flow from the other side, and we create the currency of energy called ATP, right? Which is adenosine triphosphate, if we kind of go back in time and remember from biology. Now, there are multiple types of fuel that help you get the ATP out, and each one results in the equivalent of, let's say, when we drive a car, there's the exhaust that comes out and pollutants that kind of come out. So, some are cleaner, some are dirtier, right? And the harmful effluents, if you will, that come out of this process is something that you might find unbelievable. It's actually O minus ions, which is oxygen ions, right? Now, they're super highly reactive and need something to react with, and failing which they start causing harm to our, what we call our vasculature, which is our arteries, to tissues, to DNA, etc. And in recent times, in post COVID world, we'd have heard of something called cytokine storms, right? So these are some of the things that trigger a storm like that, right? And I mean, I'm just using an example, what we call ROS, which is reactive oxygen species. Now, that leads to inflammation. There's something called oxidative stress, etc. We're able to measure that. And if we are at a state of what I call chronic inflammation, we know that we're heading to a direction where it's not going to serve us well. It's a slippery slope, right? There are certain hormones which are super critical to the functioning of the body, and these are the communication mechanisms from one part of the body to another. And one example of that is what I would call insulin. Now, insulin is a super critical hormone, plays a very crucial role in multiple processes and functions. One key thing is, logically think of it as the key that opens the wall of a cell to deposit glucose, and that glucose is what gets used to create energy. That's one role it plays. Another role for insulin is figuring out, should I go into spend energy or store energy? And I mean, trying to get it into the financial world, what you need to use is what you'd probably have in your savings account, and what you need to save for later is probably what you would put in an FD or investment, etc. So in our body, fat is the energy we put aside for later, right? And derivatives of glucose, or what we keep for using what energy needs of here and now, right? And so here and now is obviously glucose that's in the cell, it's glucose that's in your bloodstream, it's glucose, a compound of glucose called glycogen that's stored in our muscles and in our liver. If the glucose levels get depleted, then you kind of borrow from there. Fat is your long term energy store. Hey, if I am stranded on an island, right, marooned on an island, and I have no access to food, and I'm Tom Hanks in Castaway, how will I make energy? That's where you break your FD, or you liquidate your investments and kind of get energy, and that's the storage that happens, right? Now, what if that insulin stops doing its job properly? There's a problem. And one common thing across all of this is something called insulin resistance. Now, this predates any kind of diagnosis of a disease by another 8, 10, 12 years. If you are showing a tendency of having what's called insulin resistance, which means your body's producing insulin, but it's not effective, right? It's the first sign that again you've started on this path, and you need to make choices that will quickly kind of get that to a better place, right? So this again is not typically measured, but is one of those red flags, right? And I would say one simplistic thing is, we all, let's say, we became adults, and our vertical growth kind of stopped. Let's just say, be generous and say, by the time we finished our engineering, 21, 22, whatever it is, right? In theory, we were a full formed adult. I don't know if you remember what your weight was. I would guess I was at 65 odd kgs then, give or take, right? And anything we've added, technically, we can always go back to that. So if you are seeing a steady increase in weight, right, I would say that is one sign of your metabolism not working well, which is very visible, right? Obviously, if I have to look at insulin resistance, I need to look inside the blood. If I need to look at inflammation, I need to look inside the blood. If I were to look at your immunity and defense mechanisms, I need to look at your nutrition profile, right? Do you have enough vitamin B12 and D? Because all of these play a critical role. Do you have the right bacteria in your gut, which is super important component, not just for immunity, but for ensuring we extract the right nutrition and it also plays a critical role in our emotional state of mind. There's something called as a gut brain axis. Now, obviously, there are multiple ways we've figured out what those red flags are. And, we've, like I said, we made a product to be able to do that. And I think that's something anybody above 35 should do, in my view, right? And take stock of where am I? Is there this early warning signs that I need to A, notice, and B, do something about, so that I don't get to bad outcomes, right? Being diagnosed with some kind of a disease later. But those would be the kind of red flags. And like I said, the simple, visible thing will be, if your weight is increasing, right? And it is a sign that there is a process within the body that's not working well.
Interesting, interesting. So it's not just the manifestation of weight, perhaps, because that's external. It's also could be inflammation, which is silent. So I remember when I did it, I had this shoulder injury, and the first thing that came out of the test was that you have inflammation. And I said, yes, I have an injury. He said, okay, well, the inflammation could be because of the injury, but what if it's not? And if it was inflamed anyhow and you didn't have this injury, would it then still be, because it could be a silent inflammation inside? And like you said, inflammation is related to perhaps, and I find the science fascinating to be, I know that I'll geek out on this as well, because I love the very basic concepts of the first principles here. But the fact that you have oxygen ions, oxygen atoms in the blood, and the fact that we eat antioxidants like an apple, and that kind of it now occurs to me why. And perhaps the antioxidant is the concept of negating. So in a way, somehow this brings together a lot of the other things. But the fact is that you can identify the inflammation, and you can identify some of the other things that you talked about, the insulin resistance, for instance. So if your body is insulin resistant, in fact, I think perhaps the science, and you talked about me about this in another context, is the fact that you're fat is that you're insulin resistant in some way. Otherwise, the body doesn't need to do what you're
So there are
doing.
multiple pathways. For example, there's a thyroid pathway again, etc. But insulin resistance is one big dominant pathway which does lead to people putting on weight. Yeah.
Yeah, and interestingly, the concept of insulin resistance has been countered, or low production of insulin is not because your body cannot produce insulin. It's that because your body is not answering that insulin, and therefore it's not producing enough, saying, Sala, these cells are so full of glucose, I will not produce insulin, because every time I send insulin to please take glucose in, he's saying, boss, go away, I don't like you, I don't want you. And therefore less insulin is produced, and less insulin is produced makes all the other complications happen, perhaps.
Half right, half wrong. But essentially, Deepak, I mean, you got the essence of it right till the very end. Insulin, while it's a very important hormone, before I started down this path, my belief was, as a diabetic, my body is not producing enough insulin, right? And because I knew that as you become more and more diabetic, you start injecting insulin, and the belief was that's because your body is not producing, there's a manufacturing defect, etc. But what I know now is, while yes, that is a small component, these are folks that have what's called type 1 diabetes, and for them, injecting insulin is the solution. Whereas the bulk of the people who are, type 2 diabetic, and many other people which are not even diabetic but have a condition called insulin resistance. And here, it's actually your body's producing more insulin than you need, except it is not as effective as it needs to be. It's kind of a vicious cycle. You produce more insulin, the effectiveness goes down. To get the same outcome, your body produces even more and even more and even more, till your beta cells in your pancreas max out on the capacity to produce insulin. And that is when you need to have guys that urge you to produce more insulin, which could be oral medication, it could be injecting insulin, and so on. But what I want to make a point is that anything that makes your body produce more insulin is actually worsening your insulin resistance, right? However, symptomatically, when there is more insulin, your glucose levels may go down. You may believe you're in control, but your underlying situation is actually becoming worse. And that, I think, is a distinction and something that people need to know. So if I was, an alcoholic, and we're brothers, and I come to you and I say that, hey, Deepak, give me some money, I want to get a drink, right? And you say, hey, no, no, I'm not going to spend money on all of this. But I keep pestering you and, chasing you down, and you're kind of sick of it, and you give me some money, I go get drunk, I come back, I'm the most civil guy ever, right? But if you notice what's happening, by giving me the more alcohol, my behavior has become better now, which is symptomatically I'm better. But my alcoholism actually became worse. So, same way, to a person that has insulin resistance, you do stuff that puts in more insulin. While it may feel like the glucose levels are coming down, your underlying insulin resistance is actually becoming worse. And which is what I think traditional science and the way it's applied has gotten it wrong, and it's a wrong line of treatment, right? And there's a drug called sulfonylurea class of drugs. There's the injected insulin for people with insulin resistance, for people with type 2 diabetes. That is not a good idea. While it may feel like you'll get an immediate win, you're losing the, I mean, you may win a battle, but you're losing the war, right? And it keeps making your condition worse. So there are many such red flags, if you will, right? Even if you take a look at our heart disease, we talk about LDL and HDL and triglycerides and all of these. Yes, they have a place and they need to be measured and assessed, etc. But there are other indicators. There's something called as homocysteine, for example. Now, homocysteine levels being higher than what's good is super highly correlated with cardiovascular risk. And the solution is quite simple. If you had enough vitamin B's, you wouldn't have a high level of homocysteine, and your cardiovascular risk would actually be down. And some of these we may just brush off as saying, "Ha, ठीक है, ये vitamin deficiency है, वो vitamin deficiency है," but we don't understand the role that they play, and some biochemical reactions that don't get completed because there's a lack of a certain material needed for the entire equation to, or the chain of reactions to complete. So there are things like these that are those red flags that give you a quick peek into, hey, my body is not working well, while traditional health parameters are fine. As I go along, I will be on a slippery slope heading towards one or more of these medical ailments. And they're all kind of an umbrella, like I talked about. It's called metabolic syndrome. They're all related. And if you want to look at kidney health, there's something called cystatin. So there's a bunch of these that we've kind of put together, and that I believe anybody above 35 should do, right? It is your duty to figure out not only am I feeling healthy, but how are the processes in my body working, and are they working well? Because the sooner you know, the easier it is for you to make a U-turn and head back towards a state of good health. Because the moment you get diagnosed with a lifestyle condition, you're told it's a progressive and chronic journey, and the simple way to look at that, it's a one-way street. You can slow it down with interventions, with medicine, with management, but you cannot come back. And I think we have figured a way of how do we get those back, and we'll talk about it. We've talked about it before. We'll talk about it in the end as I summarize. But I would say, even if you don't have a problem, if you know you're heading there, make that U-turn, right? Get that early warning sign, get that red flag, and kind of act on it. And one is, what are the secrets hidden in your blood, etc., which is what, like I said, we've created a product around. But more importantly, we all became adults at 21, 22-ish when we got out, graduated, etc. So the size shape we were in then is a size and shape we can be in now. And over a period of time, as we add weight, I mean, I'm not saying adding weight is wrong, and definitely not going down body shaming, etc. But what I'm trying to say is, there are some vulnerabilities and and lack of effectiveness in your metabolism that is leading you to put on weight. And one visible sign is, if you're feeling that you're continuously putting on weight, and I don't think you should stick to the standard formula of eat less, move more. That's not going to cut it, because what's happening is your body is working differently now, right? Just because you eat less, move more, it's not like you'll get better. You need to fix those underlying root causes, the metabolism, etc. So that's a visible way to look at it. But otherwise, I think there's a lot in your blood, traditionally not used, but something that we have knowledge of, something that we kind of help people figure out. And I think, like with any investments, getting that early sign, investing in your health, investing in your body, knowing if there are vulnerabilities and fixing it, is much easier to do, and obviously a little tougher to fix it as you go along. But I mean, there's always hope.
There is, in fact, I think, Vivek, as much as I come to think of it, red flags is one thing, and then there's always this argument of, I can do 40 push-ups, I can run a marathon, I can run 5 kilometers, I can get up and immediately start, with 40 squats. The argument of fit versus healthy, and I think of it in the context of, let's say, in my case, and we were working together at the time. There was my mom had a heart attack. and she's the healthiest person I know, and she's extremely careful about her diet. She doesn't eat non-veg. She is fit. She's thin. She's not in any way overweight. Does not look like she could be a person who could have gotten a heart attack.
Absolutely. She's so super thin, right?
Yes, and then you find that a person like that gets a heart attack, and that is the concept of how can a fit person be unhealthy, and how therefore is it possible for someone who's so physically active and who's so energetic also to still have these underlying problems inside. We've seen this in the economic side of things. We see companies resulting with results which have great profits. One big example was DLF. This was a long time ago, but DLF was showing these fantastic profits in 2007, and then we were saying, oh, great company, good profits. Look a little deeper, and you say, well, where are these profits coming from? Why isn't the company able to generate any cash? And you look at it and say, well, the company is not generating cash because you know what? It's recording revenue by selling certain things to another company, and that company isn't actually paying it yet. So, well, who's this other company? And they go a little deeper, and it says that other company is a company owned by the promoters of DLF, and those people haven't paid. They've bought something, but they haven't paid for it. So the cash hasn't yet come. That cash is a huge portion of its revenues. So DLF's making a lot of profits, but underlying it is something really unhealthy. That's no cash flow. And eventually, when they found out this other company couldn't pay, and that was for multiple of other reasons, they merged together, and then this profits that were earlier being generated no longer are. So the unhealthiness reflected eventually in the bad part of everything. So what was fit, perhaps from a profitability perspective, was unhealthy from a balance sheet perspective, and the unhealthiness was a real problem. And we find that maybe perhaps the body has an equivalent, right? So you can be fit and you can be unhealthy. How does the metabolism, how does the situation here work in the body?
Yeah, I think great question, Deepak, and very similar. I would say again, like with many points we've discussed, typically, in our minds, it may be very difficult for us to separate fitness versus health, right? And I think many people kind of equate it. If you're fit, that means you're healthy. If you're healthy, that means you're fit, and so on and so forth. But medically or biologically, I've figured out that health and fitness are two separate states. Typically, high state or levels of fitness does seem to imply that it is a high level of health, but that's not necessarily true, right? And as we've seen with multiple cases, starting with celebrities that we've kind of grown up watching, reading about, etc., starting with Dada, Saurav Ganguly, elite sports person, with supremely fitness oriented approach, etc., and who's recently retired and all of those. But him going through his cardiovascular issues, you'd wonder, what's wrong? Is it genetics, etc.? And in the corporate world, we've seen leaders from companies like an SAP, like a BMW. We've seen people like come on dance shows who spend so much of their time physically and yet having cardiovascular issues, etc. And you sit back and wonder, hey, is this fate? Bad luck keech kharab hai, as Amir Khan would put it, I guess. Is this genetics? There's nothing I can do, right? This is the way I've been born, etc. And that's the way you would explain it to yourself. But the reality is, I would say, yes, genetics does play a role. But I think to a large extent, it is how healthy and how functioning are all the organs and the hormonal systems, etc., within. And fitness and choices you make around fitness play a role, but I would say the single biggest lever that makes this change is the right nutrition. And if you get nutrition wrong, you could be super fit, you could be running marathons, but you could still be having arteries that are getting plaque that is being connected there, and that would make you susceptible to obviously a cardiovascular issue. So my realization, Deepak, is that it's two separate things. Yes, you should take steps to be fit, but more importantly, you should take steps to be healthy. And I think having the right kind of input that drives the machinery of a body, which is nutrition, is extremely important. And if there's only one thing you had to change, it is to get your nutrition right. And that will hold you in good stead to a large extent. But obviously, like I said before, the rhythm alignment, the exercise and fitness, both of the mind and of the body, sleep, stress, all of them play a role, right? Having a peaceful or a harmonious mind. But if you can do all of them, fantastic. But if there's one thing you need to fix, I would say fix your nutrition. If there's a second thing, I would say focus on your fitness. And when I say fitness, I mean both of the body and of the mind.
Oh man. Okay. In fact, I think that's what when I did the program myself, I thought I found that quite fast, quite interesting because you would tell me, Deepak, you can cheat on not taking enough exercise, but don't cheat on the food. And to me, that was important because it has its symbolism in the sense if I miss an exercise round, I could probably make it back much faster. But if I don't do enough, I mean, if I eat the wrong stuff, which is essentially what cheating is, then I'd reverse. I mean, it take a little bit longer to reverse because things change in a different way. But what's also interesting to me in this whole thing is the whole aspect around how we solve it. So we've identified a problem, perhaps, and we identified that people have a problem and they need to recognize that problem. But then, how do you go about solving it? Because it can't be a one size fits all solution. It can't be like eat an apple a day and everything will go away because
That would be nice.
Apple would be, I mean, Apple's the world's largest business, so everybody's probably eating an apple somewhere every day. But there is also the problem of how do you solve it, and how do you and therefore your company AltLife address this problem. And I think you mentioned an interesting three mechanisms that you use to address it. And I found parallels in that in the financial world, and maybe we'll discuss that as we go along. But tell us about that.
Absolutely. We've looked at disease and think of disease as the opposite of health, right? In three ways. A, can we predict disease? B, can we prevent disease? And C, can we beat disease? And this, works for different kinds of people over a period of time. Like I was saying, the all the work we put in on the diagnostic piece, on the assessment that we have, which is not just blood work, which it definitely is, but also includes ways of figuring out various lifestyle components, your level of stress, and it all kind of comes together. And we've simplified it into a simple metric. And I urge all people, who are on the wrong side of 30 to kind of get started on, because you'd rather know sooner as opposed to later. And that's what we call predict health. And there's two components to it. One is a one time, and then one is an ongoing monitoring, which is an annual kind of a subscription where, let's say, every quarter we kind of profile, and through the time series data, which I'm sure you do a lot of in terms of fundamental or technical analysis and so on, we're able to spot early warning signs much sooner than taking a look at a snapshot in time. So these are the offerings that we have under what we call predict health. And then there is prevent, and these are for people who may not believe that they have a problem, but yet there are components of their health that can be strengthened and fortified. So what we offer here is, there's something called as a gut revive. And like I was talking before, I think what we call a gut microbiome is a super critical component of a state of good health. Plays a role in immunity, plays a role in what's called bioavailability and absorption of all the nutrients, plays a role in your emotional state of mind, etc. And very less understood and less known. And these are all, billions of bacteria that reside to a large extent in our large intestine. And based on choices we make, we may not have the right representation of flora and fauna, and that in turn makes us weaker, in turn makes us more susceptible, in turn impacts the state of our mind, etc. So we've got something to help people strengthen just the flora and fauna in their gut, called a gut revive. We also have something to help people amp up on their immunity, called as an immunity revive. We've, like I said, come up with our own curated set of designs that drive better metabolism in terms of a mix of exercise and yoga and meditation that we've put together. And obviously this is something that fits people who've never done anything before, because we've taken a unique way of what we call a level zero, where we're saying my 75-year-old mom should be able to do. And slowly, as you build confidence, as you build that flexibility and strength, you can graduate to additional levels. So that's again something you could proactively do, right? So all of these would broadly fall under the prevent disease umbrella. And obviously you can just subscribe to healthy food that we make, right? And my daughter enjoys it and I'm happy, right? Because whenever she chooses the LiveAltLife food over, let's say, McDonald's or whatever, good for her. And the third one, which is, I think, the most critical, is what we say beat disease. And these are for people like me, and there are many of them out there who didn't have the predictive tools, didn't take the preventive steps, and are stuck with something like, my cholesterol levels are high, my BP is high, I have diabetes, I'm struggling with excess weight, I have a fatty liver. So this is where we say beat disease, where we've put together a curated program that includes all of these vectors. It's what we call our triangular approach to health, where there's the precision nutrition driven through our food and nutrition plank, and we have a AI system that ensures that you get the right quantity and the right breadth and depth of every nutrient needed that will help fix your metabolism. The second plank is your mind and body fitness, where again we put together the right kind of routines that drive mental health as well as physical health through exercise, yoga, and meditation kind of put together. And the third is what we call smart diagnostics and consultation, where we've relooked at how we assess you, and we take snapshots at different point in time. You see the transformation that happens to your state of health, and obviously there are the experts that you might need, which is doctors and nutritionists and physiotherapists and counselors, who kind of all of us take a view of you in totality, help with multiple vectors that need to drive better health. And unlike in real world, you'd go to multiple people, you get advice which is conflicting, etc., etc., whereas this is built around you and makes it super convenient and is without a doubt safe, natural. We don't use anything processed, anything chemically contaminated, etc., in what it is that we make. And there are multiple other lifestyle conditions, and on our website we have a list of how we will be able to impact, but these are broadly ways for people to engage. And we've seen outcomes where people are on cholesterol medication and diabetes medication and hypertension medication, maybe insulin, 100 plus kgs, that go through our what we call our health restore program, and see transformational outcomes, right? They get off all their medicines, they lose some 20-30 kgs of weight, and all their parameters are green. Not just traditional measures of health, but also the underlying red flags, if you will, and the red flags have turned green, right? So that's broadly what we do, where we've taken cutting edge science and applied that and made it available in safe, natural, convenient ways, and also made it easy to for different kinds of people to engage and take advantage.
It's so interesting because you see parallels to this to say financial lives as well, because I think I see the way you say predict. So because we in the financial world try to predict what are the different things that can go wrong, and that predictiveness can be based on a benchmark, and we create a benchmarks, we call them benchmarks, we call them indexes. Oh, we're here, we've got a moving average, we've got this, and the stocks are way above, way below, some bond yields are above or below. We've got inflation. Oh, I like 2 to 6%, but anything more than 6 is bad. And I guess what you're saying by predict is you're saying, boss, where are you? Are you in a point where I can actually predict that something is going to go wrong to you in the future by using the benchmarks that you've created over various parameters, and that could be at for us macroeconomic world is the inflation. For the stock market is something else, the barometers and index. It could be something else, it could be the USD and INR combination, and people keep talking about that. For you it's different measures, but everyone creates has an impact, and therefore just the ability to do that on a regular basis, because you need that in the financial world, you need that in the human world as well.
Absolutely. And you're geeky in multiple ways, including the way you look at data, right? And financial data for sure. It's no different. Same principles as you apply, and obviously you can take a snapshot view, but there's a lot of value when you take look at time series data, right? And the trends, the moving averages only come over time series data, and our predict is essentially the same thing as applied to the state of our health. And some of it is future looking, and there are indicators that kind of tell you where you might be headed, and there are indicators that are more lagging, which tell you that hey, you're in a good place or a bad place now. And it's the same concept as we applied, packaged as a one-off test, and like I said, a ongoing subscription, but the approach is exactly the same.
I seen this another thing that we do in finance quite often. I could tell you, listen, fix your portfolio by getting rid of X or do Y, but a lot of things become standardized, right? So for instance, we tell people all the time, unless you're a super expert, you're likely to be benefited by just diversifying your portfolio. You just do different things, concentrate on stocks versus bonds versus India versus US versus in India. I don't want to be only in banks. I want to be in banks plus industrials plus FMCG plus whatever. So I think what you're talking about is creating this health portfolio inside of you. That health portfolio says, boss, you can't just be focused on fitness, because that's one thing. It's a good thing, but it's not the only thing. It's only going to work in correspondence with something else, which is your perhaps gut bacteria at one level. There is your like you talked about, the plaque that's in your arteries, that's going to be addressed in a different way. Your inflammation is going to be addressed in a different way. Your lack of immunity or perhaps impaired immunity is going to be addressed in a different way. These are all different things you need to monitor, you need to address in different ways. And this diversification is exactly what keeps you healthy, because if you've got impaired immunity and plaque together, you're probably now at 2x the impact of everything else. So you got, if you fix one, you might be able to offset the impacts of damage in another. So this diversification is natural. And you're actually saying, don't address one, address all at the same time, and in a way fix your health. And perhaps the last part of it, which was the beet thing, and that was interesting, because when I used to eat the food, I'm telling you, to be honest, the one big problem it solved for me, that was, I didn't know what I had to eat every day. And a busy person doesn't have time to actually go back here and analyze what needs to be done. So if I haven't brought food from home, I'm pretty much going to say, go to Swiggy and say whatever's on top here. So even if it's a bad thing, I mean, I love biryani, it probably has culinary fantasticness, but it's not healthy to eat. And perhaps I could eat it on a cheat day, but otherwise it's not a good thing to order. But it would be right there up front and center, and but what it did, what to me was, it said somebody's going to deliver food to me every single day, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. That just changed my life, because just attitudinally I'm like, okay, I'm not going to eat anything else, because A, that would be cheating, and B, this food that's coming in is nutritious and delicious. But it changes behavior, because once you know that you're doing this and it's helping you, it doesn't matter that I don't lose 20 kgs or I lose only 5. The point is, it's making you feel better, and at some point that it is. The financial equivalent of this is almost like getting a feedback from the market that, dude, what you're doing is right. Because in a down market, you weren't so badly down. In up market, you're doing well, but not maybe as phenomenally as maybe Rakesh Junjunwala is. But it's fine, because what you need to do is work to your level of fitness from your financial life itself. But you are effectively from a really bad place, perhaps, coming back to life. And that coming back to life is, the Pink Floyd album, but it's also true of human life.
Absolutely. And I think that, single vector approaches better than no vectors. For example, in a portfolio, I'm assuming is better than no portfolio. But I think, but the right way to maximize the benefit is to have a, approach where you get the right components of each of these. And obviously, it's not easy. That's when you need experts. And like somebody would come to you for that expertise in investment and in managing wealth. I think in terms of managing health, we know the impact of each of these levers and help construct the right kind of a portfolio for people to get to a better state of health. And obviously we've tried to demystify all the complexities into the benchmarks and indices you're talking about. So we have something called as a health index, we have something called as a protection index, we have something called as a lifestyle index. And while there may be multiple data points, this makes it easy for you to look and track and how you're progressing and should you be worried about something. And where there is where you kind of drill down and look at what specific area of vulnerability or risk might exist and what might need to be done to kind of fix that. So I think the approach is very 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 similar, right?
And in fact, here's also another area of similarity, which I'm assuming now. I may be assuming things, but I know that this is something that's a problematic thing in the financial industry. Now, I hear a lot of financial advisors, and some of them are really good. So, what happens typically is that somebody comes to them with maybe an okayish portfolio, a rotten portfolio, a very complicated portfolio, and so on. One of the things that financial advisors always tell me is that, Deepak, people aren't willing to pay for financial advice. This stuff can save their lives because, but they won't pay because, the assumed cost of it is at that time quite a lot. Even if you did a few changes, the impact of those changes can be so dramatic that you'll recover whatever cost it is in a very relatively small period of time, but also create a room for a lot more growth. So this could be because of somebody advising you, say, 100 products. Now if you give me a 100 product portfolio, I'm going to take a lot of time just to analyze those 100 products in the first place, because just to figure out if those things meet the criteria that you have is going to take a x amount of time. And the financial advisors tell me, Deepak, if I have to look at 100 products before I go through, I'm going to have to have a cost to it. And most of the time people come to me and say, Deepak, I mean, just analyze this for free, right? It's just analysis. But it's not. It's got to be something that's related to you, because it's not just me looking at those products and say, oh, these are great products. Are they suitable to you in the first place? And then secondly, how to get you out of it is going to be dependent on when you got in, how much you got in at, and why those products were bought, and perhaps your tax situation, and whether we should do it this year or next year. So now there's a layer of customizability that happens. But also the underlying point about this is not the cost of providing the service. It's the benefit that the person accrues that is not visible because it's delayed. It's like if I told you I'll get your weight down by 2 kgs tomorrow, you're willing to pay me. But if you're telling me this, and what I'm going to do is going to make sure your weight comes down over the next year, the immediate answer is like, okay, I'll come back. Why don't you tell me when that last day comes when I lose those 2 kgs? And then, so it's almost like that people come to you in the financial world. How do you handle this? Are people willing to pay? Or is there a change that we need to see? Because I'm seeing this health as one of the biggest eroders of wealth in the longer term, in the sense that if you don't keep your health right, you're going to spend all the money that you're making
In fixing yourself,
in
right?
fixing yourself.
Yeah.
So some of these things will obviously cost you money. I mean, you're sending food to people every day is obviously going to cost people money. But honestly, if you didn't do that and you told people exact recipes of how to make stuff, they wouldn't do it. And there is a cost to doing that. And therefore, how do you address that?
So one thing, Deepak, it's the same people, right? So I don't think they will behave any differently, because same people that are coming for advice on wealth are coming to us, let's say, for advice on health, and the behavior is kind of similar. And it is a battle. But that being said, I think obviously it can be a question, but I think it's our eyes to articulate what that value is and why it's worth what it's worth, for the effort that put in, for the expertise, for the processes that have been put in place, for the tech that's been built that makes it more intelligent, and so on and so forth. But two things that I wanted to talk about in general. Obviously there is a objection to pay, but clearly we've seen that there are enough people that are advisory, and it's not a problem with the advice, it's the ability to sustain and execute toward that advice which is a problem. So we took a call as a business model that we don't want to be a DIY, no do it yourself. We will be a DIFM, which is do it for me. And we'll make it super convenient so that it is sustainable and it is easily doable, like you've experienced. And to be able to do that needs a lot of organizational capability, IP building, etc., which is what translates to the cost, right? For example, irrespective of where you are, your food will end up. I mean, breakfast could be home, lunch could be, office, and dinner could be in a club. So, to do that, there's obviously systems we've had to build, capacity we've had to build, and so on and so forth. So, it is a pretty much everyday conversation that happens with prospects and clients, etc. But what I've seen is, I don't know if it's the same, and I'd love to get your thoughts on it. Two things. One is, we see that it depends on the magnitude of the problem in the mind of the client. If they really believed it's a big problem that they want to solve, and they're motivated enough to solve it, then the sum doesn't seem big for them. And those are guys that easily sign up. And there are people that may believe, hey, is this the top of the priority? Should I be focused on this problem as opposed to maybe my portfolio allocation, or my real estate transaction, or my career progression, etc., etc. Then it obviously they don't perceive it as the top priority, and then they'll say that, hey, this is a big steep price to pay for something which is not top of my priority. Obviously, they don't articulate it, but that's the takeaway that we've had through the experiences we've had with speaking with people. And we've seen in our space, for example, and I mean, again, there may be parallels in the investment world. One, first time diagnosis is a huge motivator. The fear from a first time, those guys act, and for them, it is valuable, and they don't look as much at the price tag as what they can get out of it. Second are what we call unhealthy experimenters. These are guys that want to get better, keep trying, have tried everything. There's a fat diet, I'll try it. This is a new product, I'll try it. But have reached a point in time where, in general, they're doing well in life. But on health, they've not been able to, despite the intent. And when they reach a point in time where there's real frustration saying, hey, I need to fix this, I need to conquer this. And then somebody like us present will say, hey, yeah, this is it, and I want to do it. And the third is, which is what I call trigger based, where in general you could be probably indifferent, but there are specific times where your level of consciousness around this or prioritization around this becomes a little high. And that could be typically, you have an incident around you, right? Be it a friend, family, colleague who ends up having, let's say, a heart attack, or having some problems with their kidney, going to dialysis, and suddenly you're able to extrapolate and say, hey, that could be me. So for a period of time, their level of wanting to become better is higher, and at the time they gravitate towards somebody like us and say, help me get this done. But if it's not high on their priority, it's a problem. But the counter I have, Deepak, I don't know what you feel about this, is, and somewhere this gets my goat. Obviously, I don't tell it, to my clients, but you want to do a kitchen upgrade, it's a 2-3 lakh kind of a cost, right? You would, to take a week's vacation, you go to a, when you could, pre-COVID times, and hopefully soon we will be able to travel. But you want to go to Southeast Asia, you want to go to Europe with your family, a week, 10 days will be easily 3, 4, 5 lakhs, right? And then forget all of this, you look at your car, and you have your car that over the next 3 to 5 years, there's some maintenance you'll pay. You ask people how much would you spend on it, that would again be, let's say, 2, 3, 4, 5 lakhs, depending on what one drives. And then obviously, if there's a problem, you need a stent put in, how much will that cost? It's a 4 to 5 lakh kind of a procedure typically. Now when there is a problem, and for these known ones, people are okay to pay. But like you were saying, you can only enjoy all of this if you're healthy. And now to take a preventive view, or to take a proactive view and say, I'll fix my health, the price tag suddenly seems, hey, should I spend so much on me? My answer, goddamn hell, yes. Because if you don't spend on yourself, and you will not be able to enjoy all of this, right? I mean, your quality of life, your health span, all of that get impacted. And some people get this, right? And when you frame it in the right perspective or context, but otherwise, obviously, we wait for people who see the value, right? Because there's no point trying to force yourself on somebody that doesn't realize or believe it's a big enough problem that they'd like to solve.
And it's interesting because here is where also there is a layer of at a certain point. I mean, we've always had startups, for instance, that have kept costs next year zero. And perhaps that's also triggering the solution saying, the problem saying, Acha, everything else is free. Why is this costly? And is also another layer. And I mean, this is true of almost everything, that if you pay enough for something, you're going to value it, and you're going to value the discipline that it brings to you. And perhaps this is an after effect, a side effect of it also. I mean, somebody told me this, Deepak, if you buy an inexpensive thing, whatever it is, that something that comes to you free, somebody tells you, Deepak, this is phenomenal video series that teaches you everything there is about finance, and it's free. The value of that free suddenly becomes next to nothing. People are like, karenge whenever. I know I want to do this, but it's free, so I'll do it sometime. Whereas if you're paying for it, the chances that you're going to ignore it are next to zero, because it's just the difference of your having paid for it that enforces discipline. In the financial world, we tell people this: discipline is everything, right? It's not because discipline is everything and it's a word, but it's simple. If you just saved a certain amount of money for every day, take 10 rupees or 100 rupees out of your pocket, and perhaps most of you won't even feel it. Take the 100 rupees out of your pocket. If we had done this, and I speak as a financial person, I haven't done it, so just as a disclaimer, if since we graduated, I think we could have easily spared maybe apart from the first couple of years, 100 rupees a day was relatively easy to have done. 100 rupees a day over a period of nearly 25 years since we've graduated, would be approximately 75 lakh rupees in principle. And if you had put that into the stock markets or whatever, it is probably worth 3.5 to 4 crores, maybe 5 crores today. Now, 5 crores is a lot of money for someone who, I'm assuming this, okay, all right. So it's 100 rupees a day for this many times. 5 crores is a lot of money, which I wouldn't even have felt the pinch of. And suddenly I have 5 crore rupees today, which is fantastic. The discipline is what made it happen. And for that discipline, sometimes you have to, because somebody has to make sure that 100 rupees happens every day. I wouldn't do it. I didn't do it. Now, if you tell me today that I have to do it, I won't do it for the next 10 days itself because I'm losing that discipline, right? What your product does from the health perspective is that discipline is ensured because somebody else is taking care of it for you rather than you're doing it yourself. So you're not going to cook the stuff that I tell you to cook. But if I sent you the cooked item and said, boss, this is what you need to eat, that enforces that discipline, saying, okay, he's told me, he's done all this work, I paid for it, so I am going to do it. I mean, so for a lot of people, it's like, okay, I'm paying so much, isn't it too expensive? But the problem is the way we look at things. Our ideology is a book should cost 500 rupees. Even if that book saved your life, it should cost 500 rupees. The same thing in a Netflix video series would be 500 rupees a month. And the same thing in a movie theater in PVR would be 3,000 rupees one time. So it's perhaps the packaging of it sometimes that changes it. It's not food, it's not this thing, but it's actually your future. And then, am I willing to pay this price for my future? And the answer might be, and that's my thought process around it. I think Corona would have changed people's thought process around how important health is. And if I died of Corona, perhaps I would be excused because it was stuff that happened that I couldn't have predicted. But if stuff happens to me that I could have predicted and somebody had predicted it for me and somebody had given me a lifestyle to change and I didn't change it, and that would be really screwed up.
It is criminal, I think, yeah, Deepak, because see, it's not just we're talking about, let's say, a Deepak or a Vivek or a Ashish or a Arun, etc. Right? The numbers are freaking scary. In the 7 billion people in the world, about a billion of them have a lifestyle condition now, and in the next 2 decades, it's going to get to 2 billion. India alone, the known numbers of the 1.3 billion is 200 million, and I'm assuming it's actually 2x of that because we don't know everything that's out there. In the US, for the 350 million population, it's 150 million. And if you stack up all the causes, yes, the rate of change of people who are living to dead is very high because of COVID, but it still pales compared to the damage that some of this does over a period of time. So it's insane and it's criminal if you don't act on it. And but anyway, it's a choice. It's your body, it's your life. Make the right choice. But if you make the right choice to stay healthy, I think we believe we want to make it super easy for you to get that done, right? And convenient, and that in a way justifies what we believe is the right price people need to pay for that, which I think compared to what it'll unlock is insignificant. But we'll leave it to people to make that judgment, and you and I have to defend the pricing and all of that day in and day out. I'm sure, like you built all of this infrastructure, I mean, we built something around nutrition AI system that guarantees every nutrient that you need to stay healthy. If I cook, you cook, wife cooks, cook cooks, mom cooks, there's no guarantee. So what we call precision nutrition that we drive from there, that drives this change. And that's work, right? That's IP.
Yeah.
And similarly around diagnostics, right? Again, build something out early morning, take the snapshot, and it's not as simple as the moving averages, etc. Obviously, you need to understand each of this and how it correlates, and you put all of that and build that infrastructure. And in the end, hey, you're just doing a diagnostic. Hey, you're just giving me food, right? I mean, and obviously those are the ones that I do take it as a challenge and not try to blame people who say these things. To, hey, how can we make it easier for people to be able to understand it, right? And
Yeah, and I'm telling you, in life, perhaps as much as it is in finance, I've found that simple is often the most complex. And
absolutely.
I mean, in fact, when I write, The idea is not to write a long amount of text or use complicated words. And we've been both in college fighting over who knew more
No,
longer
we used to
words.
thrive on all of these. I remember you and defenestration. Do you remember what that
Defenestration.
is?
Yes, yes, definitely. I mean, I found out there's a word called, there's a company called Finesta who've got Windows. And I knew what Finesta meant because of defenestration. And
Absolutely.
the problem really is that complexity that those things brought, although exotic, was actually harmful, because when you say defenestrate to somebody else, the other guy is looking at you and says, "Boss, tu Shashi Tharoor kab ban gaya?"
Correct.
And the problem really is in health as perhaps as much as in wealth. It's important to know. If you told me that the solution was simple, it wasn't less valuable to me today because
Right.
of my experience in that simplicity is derived from complexity. You've gone down the complex route, the rabbit hole of complexity, and come out to me and said, "Boss, this is what fixes it."
Right.
It's like that age-old solution. There's a guy. He's a very complex $1 million engine, and it goes bad, and somebody he says, "Fix it," and nobody can fix it. And then they say there's this obscure old engineer who can fix all these things. So they call him. He comes in and he looks around, taps a few things, finds a little nut somewhere, and tightens it. And says, "Well, you're done." And they run the machine, and it's running like a charm. And he's like, "Fantastic. What's the bill?" So he says, "My bill is $1,000." So that guy's like, "Oh, come on, you just tightened a knot. So what? Can you give me an itemized bill, please?" So he said, "Well, okay, I'll give you an itemized bill." And he sent an itemized bill that said, "Tightening of nut, $1. Knowing which nut to tighten, $999." And that's the point, right? In the end.
Absolutely.
So
Amazing story. And, whenever I hear, because that is the price for expertise, right? That's the price for, I would say, predictability. That's the price for certainty. And I feel proud about all the work that we've done to make, a fairly complex thing like a body, and how do we understand it, and how do we improve it and make it simple enough for people to do it. And I do believe that it's worth much more than what we're doing, because at least personally I would pay much more, right, to fix my health,
uh,
right?
especially if you've gone down the rabbit hole of actually having something bad happen to you. And
Absolutely.
I don't want to be there. And to be honest, I've been there when my mother went through it.
Yep.
And my deal now is how to not be there myself, which is, I've taken baby steps in that. But what I think is important, just to bring awareness that somebody has to do something. Now, how you do it is your problem. Once the awareness is available to you, if there are people who want to do it themselves, they're probably doing it themselves right now and solving it. But there are people who need it done for them, simply because they run very busy lives. They have the complexities and stresses of where they are. And that's true whether it's finance or it's this thing. And I give my finances out to my company. Now, of course, I'm in part of the company, and therefore I'm eventually running it. But I'm not running my portfolio. I'm running a whole bunch of things. That's because the professional part of me is going to look at things very differently than the personal part of me. The personal part of me looks at the market and says, "Boss, sell everything and take it into NF." The professional part of me is saying, "No, boss, there is some data that says don't do this. And you're going to harm yourself if you did this just because you're acting on instinct." And perhaps the equivalent of live alt life is that the alt part of it is what makes the difference, because that's what helps you want to live life, right? So
Absolutely, and you nailed it, because I am also my own customer, and if I wasn't, I know that I will not be able to do it. So in our company, in all the communication, we separate it out by saying Vivek, who's the employee, right, and then client Vivek, who's the client. And there are conversations that were, no, client Vivek would have done that. And the way we've separated it is because we want to know that the client mindset is different and the way to treat is different. And I, as a client, I'm submitting myself to the expertise of this company. Hey, fix me. And if I come to you, fix my wealth, help me with my wealth, and help me make the right decisions. And if I come to LiveAltLife, it will be help me fix my health or ensure that it remains well, etc. So
That's actually brilliant. Actually, I'd love to. I think the conversation can keep going on, but it's been a phenomenal conversation, Vivek. I hope all of you who are listening, firstly, thanks for listening. And secondly, if you'd like to know more about AltLife, I think the domain is livealtlife.com. There is a bunch of interesting information there. And if you use a coupon code, Capital Mind, Vivek has generously offered a discount on the products that they have. So check those out as well. It's been a fascinating discussion. Vivek is available online. What's your Twitter handle, Vivek?
Vivek Speak.
Vivek Speak on Twitter as well.
Yeah,
And there's,
Vivek Speak on Twitter, on LinkedIn. Obviously, not as famous or as active as you are, right? But I do have a presence and happy to respond to people that reach out for anything you may have on health. And advice is free. It's up to you to implement, and we're very happy to give out that advice if you believe you're able to execute on your own. If you need help, is when you could be a client. And like Deepak was saying, it's livealtlife.com, livealtlife.com. And the coupon code for all you folks listening to this who've gone through all the biological psychobabble, hopefully taken some things away that are valuable, is Capital Mind. And Capital Mind, so apply that as code. You can reach out to us on all our social media handles, or call us or send us an email. And we're out there. We are on a mission to help make all of you healthier, anybody that needs help. And please do take advantage of our expertise to get advice on what you need to do, or products that will help you do it more easily.
brilliant. On that note, lovely to have you here, Vivek. Thanks for listening and thanks for coming in. And to all of you here, thanks for listening.
Thank you, Deepak. It was a pleasure being a part. Thank you for having me.